broadcast again.
Feel your life train away. Another challenger?
Shadow, rise and fight!
Life is so brittle.
Time to up the stakes!
Feel your life train away. Until next time. The victorious plaything receives a reward. Another round will commence as soon as I have more combatants.
Entertain me. Take this vitality boon.
I must have time to
Twin terrors. Time to up the stakes.
Another challenger.
Take this vitality boon.
Mortal flesh is so fallible.
Feel your life drain away. Such wildly delightful desolation.
The victorious plaything receives a reward. Repeat my challenge. Gather more combatants.
At least die with some flair. Grip of the infinite.
Handle this!
A veil of safety and security.
Handle this!
Struggle or strangle.
Such wildly delightful desperation.
The victorious plaything receives a reward.
I grow bored already.
At least die with some flair. Grip of the infinite.
I'm faster. I'm not the only hunter.
Another challenger.
Time bends to my will.
Another challenger.
Twin terrors.
Molten!
Oh, a glorious spectacle.
This has been most entertaining. Take the prize. And another round.
Entertain me. Be healed and fight on. Twin terrors. Time to up the stakes.
Handle this.
Take this vitality boon. A mote of my might.
Mortal flesh is so fallible.
Such wildly delightful desperation. The victorious plaything receives a reward.
I grow bored already.
Hello. Today I would like to make my first update on my Widowhail forged dozen trigger build. While most of the components are staying the same, there are several tweaks to eke out some more min-max damage and a lot more survivability from my previous video. But to summarize my build very quickly, my build revolves around stacking attributes, all three attributes, strength, intellect, and dex, and converting that into spell damage with the node Iron Will, and then multiplying this spell damage by the Crown of Eyes Helm with a 1.5 multiplier, and then additionally, this strength is then multiplied again by 1.5 times using the Iron Fortress. Thus, this results in an extremely high increased percentage damage. In addition to this, this multiplies our flat damage, which we are getting from the bow, which is a 250% Widowhail, multiplying the Poised Prism, where all of our flat damage comes from. Along with this, since we stack all three attributes, the Cyclopean Coil, which gives 1% damage per 5 of our lowest attribute, and the Mastery, 1% increased damage per 5 attributes, also gives us a lot more increased damage. And lastly, since we don't have a lot of crit multiplier, since a lot of our passives are going to straight attributes, and we don't have any links to link increased crit damage, we also run Maligaro's Gloves, which doubles our damage. So now that we got the quick overview out of the way, I will now talk about the changes that I made to the build. So the first change I'll talk about is that previously I was running Purity of Elements so I can avoid ailments. This is now changed to a more expensive option, where I am now currently using Storm Shroud, where getting 100% shock will lead me to 100% avoid ailments, and where I get this 100% avoid shock chance is through two items, and that is this jewel that has a 50% chance to avoid shock, and also a perfect implicit on my boots with the other 50%. Thus, this frees me up a slot, so I switch out Purity of Elements into Grace, which I'll get into in a sec. The next things that I switched out is that I dropped my Precision. Previously I was running Precision because I had a Watcher's Eye that gave me flash charges on crit, but now, with my new bow that I crafted, I get this in the Crucible tree. Additionally, the reason I didn't want to run Precision is because I really have too much crit and too much accuracy, so the benefits of Precision didn't give me that much, and also I wanted to drop a third aura so that I could fit in Molten Shell, since now we get to the 50k armor amount, as again I will get into. So the last aura that I dropped was Blood and Sand, and the reason I was running Blood and Sand was because previously I was only allotted a 25% aura, and Blood and Sand was the best, since it reduces the damage taken from far out enemies. But with all this being said, standing in hideout, I have 29k armor, and then when I use my flasks, I have 54k armor, which gives me the cap for the 5k maximum Molten Shell. And I have flasks up pretty much infinitely, again, because of my bow mod that gives me 1 flask per time I crit, and it has an internal cooldown of 0.1 seconds. And since we use so many abilities, every second, I'm generating 10 charges per second, but then this 10 charge is multiplied by 100% whenever my overflowing chalice is up, which gives me 20 charges a second, which is enough to sustain my flasks during bosses. The next change I added to the build is that previously I was getting to have too much attack speed when I switched to Tornado Shot, and the reason I switched to Tornado Shot, which I'll get into more in detail later, is that Tornado Shot, at least when clearing, has the ability to hit targets from behind when you're kiting mobs around, whereas previously I was using Scourge Arrow and I was tapping forward as I was moving because I had to avoid mechanics, but then all my triggers shot basically behind me, whereas Tornado Shot I can shoot in front of me and still hit mobs behind me. But going back to the change, I previously had jewels that had attributes and attack speed on it, and I switched those out and needed CB immune, because really the only damage that kills us is overtime damage, and thus I got Might of the Meek with Corrupted Blood immunity, which is in a pretty decent position because it increases the attributes that we get on several nodes by 50%. The next jewel that I got is a new jewel because of the new pathing that I'm taking, and that is just attributes in life with a little bit of flask sustain with the duration. And now I come down to the right instead of down to the left, so that we can extend the split personality attribute increase. And the last new jewel that I got is a new Watcher's Eye, because previously I was using a Purity of Elements Chaos Resist mod, and once again the Precision Flask on Crit mod, which I don't use any of those, or I either have it on the Crucible bow. The last thing that changed a little bit about my tree, as I dropped the spell suppression nodes to pick up different spell suppression nodes. So I dropped this main spell suppression node by Ranger, and I picked up my Watcher's Eye now has spell suppression. I picked up spell suppression with movement speed so that I can move faster. And again, the Watcher's Eye also has movement speed. so this build is 20% faster now. And additionally, since we path near Magebane, I also picked up Reflexes for my last amount of 100% spell suppression. And additionally, Reflexes gives me enough evasion and evasion percent to put my armor value over 50k so that we can get the maximum amount of Molten Shell. Now going back to the gear, while most of it has stayed the same because there's really nothing to improve upon, there are a few things that changed, and that is I'm now using a new bow, which is pretty good, but it seems like I was pretty unlucky with the crafting, as I went through probably 30 to 40 bows, and I got pretty unlucky with mutations and or combining chances. So what my bow currently has is the first node has 10% increased crit chance, which is local on the bow, making it very good. The only other option here is the 6% attribute option, which is also good. Next, I got unlucky, and I got the increased attack speed, which isn't terrible, but not great. I was hoping for the 0.8% crit chance here, because if I got this, I wouldn't have to keep up power charges in my main tornado shot setup, which is reducing my tornado shot damage by roughly 20%. The third node is a perfect node, and that is the 25% cooldown reduction rate. And my fourth node is a perfect node that gives me flash charges on crit. And I believe the last change I made to gear is I got a new belt, which is a small upgrade, and that is just grace or a percentage, since now we're using grace. And once again, this gets me over the 50k armor for my Molten Shell. Now the last thing I'll talk about is my new gem links. Now pretty much everything stayed the same when it comes to my trigger spells, which if I make a third update to this build, I will test out some supports on some of my triggers instead of just having them one linked. But the main difference in my setup is the tornado shot proccing. So currently my tornado shot costs 24 mana, and this is very specific. It could be 24, could be 25, could be 26, depending on the supports that you use. But the minimum amount that you need is 24 in my setup, because it needs to cost 24 mana, because it procs all the abilities that cost 24 mana. And every single one of my triggers cost the 24 mana amount or less. So, as you can see, Toxic Rain costs 24 mana, Frenzy costs 24 mana, Ensnaring Arrow costs 24 mana, Rain of Arrows costs 24 mana, Lightning Arrow costs 24 mana, Storm Rain costs 24 mana, and this is all 24 mana on trigger. This isn't the 8 mana cost that it actually costs to spend when you proc it. So, to get to this 24 mana perfect amount, you need pretty high multipliers on your supports on Tornado Shot, even if they're not ideal for damage. So, my first one, Trinity Support, is kind of lucky, because this is one of the highest supports, if not the highest support that you can get for the link, and it's 140 multiplier for the mana cost. So this is perfect. But the next one, I'm using Awaken Greater Multiple Projectiles, which is 150 multiplier, which I need the higher mana cost to get to the 24, but is not ideal for my DPS on Tornado Shot. But this isn't really an issue, because Tornado Shot, even though it does a decent amount of damage, it probably only makes up roughly 15% maybe of my overall damage. So even if I lose 10% on 15% of my damage, that's only 1.5% less damage. And in reality, I mean, you have to do this anyway to proc your skills, because if you weren't proccing your skills every cast, you do way, way, way less damage than 1.5% less damage. So this is why Greater Multiple Projectiles is in the link. The next support is Cruelty Support, which is needed, again, because of the 140% mana multiplier. But again, this isn't ideal. We would preferably like either Elemental Focus or Awaken Elemental Damage with attacks, but these are only 130% multipliers. We need 140, so once again, we're losing another, let's say, 15% damage, which is unfortunate, but kind of needed. Now, this one, I still have to link faster attacks, even though it has a lower mana multiplier, only because I need the attack speed to hit my cooldown breakpoint. So currently, right now, without frenzy charges, my attack speed is 0.4, but my cooldown is 0.35. Now, once I do have frenzy charges, I believe my attack speed gets to like 0.365 or something like that, so very close to the cooldown. Any more attack speed, like if I had a jewel that gave 8% attack speed, I would hit the cooldown breakpoint and not proc it every single attack. So my attack speed is perfect how it is. So if you can find 55 attack speed somewhere else that I'm missing, then you could potentially swap out faster attacks with a higher mana multiplier and then use something different other than multiple projectiles or cruelty. But this is my current setup. And once again, since Tornado Shot isn't your main damage, it really doesn't necessarily matter that some of these supports aren't the highest DPS, because in the end, it is the highest DPS because of the proc rate. And again, lastly, I have Power Charge on crit, and once again, I'm using this just because my bow doesn't have a crit multiplier in the second slot because I got unlucky. So that's my second update to the build. Overall, it is way more tanky because I basically doubled my armor, and I am now running Molten Shell, so I can actually press it during harder boss fights. The damage roughly stayed the same, and I got 20% more movement speed. So, if you have any comments and questions, put them in the comments, and I'll get to them. Thanks.